The cabin's roof wouldn't survive another winter. Pamela knew this with the kind of certainty that came from months of isolation in the northern wilderness. 3 shingles torn away from last night's storm, the first snow coming in weeks. She had maybe 6 hours of good light left to fix it. She was reaching for the ladder in the shed when she heard it, a high-pitched whimpering that didn't belong in her careful, solitary world. "Walk away," she told herself. "You have work to do." But her feet carried her toward the sound anyway. The creek was swollen from rain, roaring with current. And there, caught against a fallen log in the middle of the rushing water, was a wolf pup. Its golden eyes found hers across the distance, and it let out another pitiful cry. Pamela knew wolves. Helping this pup could mean drawing its pack to her cabin, could mean exposure, discovery, everything she'd fled to avoid. The sensible choice was clear. Walk away. The pup's head dipped below the water. Pamela was in the creek before she'd made a conscious decision. The water was ice cold, rising to her thighs, pulling at her legs. She inched along the slippery log, her fingers aching, her body shaking. When she finally reached the pup, it snapped at her weakly, a defensive gesture with no strength behind it. "I'm trying to help you," she muttered, pulling the creature free. The current fought her every inch back to the bank. By the time she dragged herself out, she was shaking violently, the pup limp against her chest. She stumbled to the cabin and collapsed by the fireplace, building up the flames. For long minutes she just sat there, warming them both, watching the small ribcage rise and fall. Slowly, the pup's eyes opened, those strange golden eyes, brighter than any wolf's she'd ever seen, almost luminous in the firelight. "You're safe now," Pamela whispered. She stripped off her wet clothes and settled the pup in a nest of rags near the hearth. Outside, the sun was setting. The roof remained unrepaired, but the pup was breathing steadily. Pamela allowed herself to slump against the hearth, exhausted but strangely content. She'd spent 3 months avoiding all connection, but this small act of mercy made her feel more human than she had in months. The pup whimpered in its sleep, and Pamela rested a gentle hand on its fur. What she didn't see were the eyes watching from the forest's edge. What she didn't know was that her act of compassion had been witnessed. In the darkness beyond her cabin, something massive shifted in the shadows. A pair of eyes, the same impossible gold as the pup's, reflected the dying sunlight. Then, like smoke, the presence was gone. Inside, Pamela finally slept, the pup curled against her side. Neither heard the howl that echoed through the mountains, a sound of recognition, of gratitude, and of something that sounded almost like a promise. Chapter 1. The Impossible Gratitude. Pamela woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of isolation she'd grown accustomed to over 3 months, but something else entirely. Something wrong. The kind of silence that made prey animals freeze in open meadows, that made birds stop singing mid-song. The kind of silence that preceded danger. She sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's ordeal in the creek. The fire had burned down to embers. Gray morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, and the pup was sitting by the door, ears perked, staring at the wooden planks as if it could see through them. Pamela's heart began to pound. She'd been alone for so long that she'd almost forgotten what fear felt like. Real fear, not the constant low-grade anxiety of being discovered, but the immediate animal terror of knowing something was wrong. The pup looked back at her with those unsettling golden eyes, then returned its gaze to the door. Pamela stood on shaking legs, pulling the fur blanket around her shoulders. She'd hung her clothes by the fire last night, and they were mostly dry now, stiff with creek water and smelling of smoke. She dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with cold and fear. When she was decent, she moved to the window. Her breath stopped. The clearing around her cabin was filled with wolves. Not a few, not a small family group. Dozens of them. They sat in a perfect circle around the cabin, so still they might have been carved from stone. Gray wolves, black wolves, brown and white and mixed. All sizes, from juveniles to massive adults. Their eyes reflected the morning light, amber, gold, yellow, creating a ring of watching flames. This wasn't natural. Wolves didn't behave like this. They didn't gather in organized formations. They didn't sit with military precision, facing inward, waiting. Pamela's hand went to her throat, to the scent gland she'd been suppressing with bitter herbs for 3 months. Had they found her? Had someone sent them? Was this how it ended, cornered in her own sanctuary? The pup whined at the door. "No," Pamela whispered. "Don't." But the pup scratched at the wood, insistent. Pamela's mind raced. If she didn't open the door, they might break it down. If she did open it, they might. What? Attack? They weren't acting aggressive. They were just waiting. The pup's whining grew more urgent. With trembling hands, Pamela lifted the wooden bar that secured the door. The pup immediately pushed through the gap, tumbling out into the cold morning air. Pamela watched through the opening as the small creature ran toward the circle of wolves. A female broke from the formation, a beautiful gray wolf with intelligent eyes. The pup reached her and immediately began nuzzling against her, tail wagging frantically. The mother wolf lowered her head and licked the pup thoroughly, checking it over with the focused intensity of a parent who'd thought their child lost. Relief flooded through Pamela. The pup was reunited with its mother. The wolves would take it and leave. She could return to her isolation, her safety. The wolves parted. Something moved through their ranks, and every wolf lowered its head as it passed. Even from inside the cabin, Pamela could feel the power rolling off the creature that emerged into the clearing's center. It was the largest wolf she'd ever seen, black as midnight, with a massive frame that dwarfed every other animal present. Its shoulders came up to what would have been a grown man's chest. Its paws were the size of dinner plates, and its eyes, those eyes were the same, impossible gold as the pup's. But they held an intelligence that was distinctly, terrifyingly human. This was not just a wolf. Pamela's omega instincts screamed at her to shut the door, to hide, to make herself small and invisible. But she couldn't move. She could only watch as the black wolf stalked toward her cabin with deliberate, measured steps. It stopped 10 feet from her door. Then, slowly, it lowered its massive head until its muzzle nearly touched the ground. A bow. The wolf was bowing to her, behind it, as if responding to some silent command. Every single wolf in the clearing lowered their heads in unison. Dozens of wolves, all bowing toward her cabin, toward her. Pamela's legs nearly gave out. The black wolf raised its head and released a howl that shook the very air, a sound so deep and resonant that Pamela felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the marrow of her being. It wasn't threatening. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, a debt recognized. Then, as one, the entire pack joined the howl. The sound was overwhelming, echoing off the mountains, rolling through the valley, proclaiming something to the entire forest. When silence finally returned, the black wolf turned and walked back toward the tree line. It paused there, and 2 younger males broke from the formation. They carried something between them, a deer, freshly killed, still warm. They dragged it to Pamela's porch and deposited it at her feet. An offering, a gift of survival. Pamela stared at the deer, at the wolves, at the impossibility of what was happening. The 2 males retreated quickly, rejoining the pack. The black wolf watched her from the forest's edge, its golden eyes locked on hers across the clearing. In that gaze, Pamela saw something that made her blood run cold and hot simultaneously. Recognition, as if the creature knew her, as if it had been looking for her. Then the wolf turned away, and the air around it began to shimmer. Pamela's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. The transformation was horrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Bones cracking and reforming with sounds like breaking branches, fur receding into skin, the massive body compacting, reshaping, becoming something else entirely. When it was over, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was naked, his body covered in scars that told stories of violence survived. Muscles coiled like steel cables under bronze skin. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, wild and untamed. But it was his face that held her frozen sharp features that might have been beautiful if they weren't so fierce, so predatory. And those eyes, still golden, still watching her with that same terrible recognition. He took 1 step toward the cabin. Pamela's vision tunneled. The world tilted sideways. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the sound of heavy footsteps running toward her door, and a deep voice speaking a single word in a tone that held something like wonder. Found. Chapter 2. The teaching dynamic begins. Pamela woke to warmth. Not the meager warmth of her carefully rationed fire, but genuine heat, the kind that soaked into bones and chased away the perpetual chill of the northern wilderness. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in the Omega quarters of her old pack, surrounded by others of her kind, safe, and her eyes snapped open. She was in her own bed, covered with not just her fur blanket but two others she didn't recognize. Thick, luxurious pelts that must have come from the wolves. The fire roared in the hearth, built up far higher than she ever dared waste wood on. And sitting in her reading chair, watching her with those unsettling golden eyes, was the man. He'd found clothes. Her clothes, specifically a pair of her largest wool pants that barely reached his calves, and one of her father's old shirts she'd kept for sentimental reasons. The shirt strained across his shoulders, the buttons unable to close over his chest. He looked absurd and dangerous in equal measure, like a wolf wearing sheep's clothing and fooling absolutely no one. Pamela sat up slowly, clutching the furs to her chest. "You're still here." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then he nodded once. "The others?" He gestured toward the window. Pamela followed the movement and saw 3 wolves lying in her yard. The gray mother, the pup, and one large brown male. Guarding. Waiting. "They can't stay," Pamela said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can't. People can't know I'm here. If someone sees wolves circling my cabin, they'll investigate. They'll find me." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He opened his mouth, and what came out was a sound halfway between a growl and a grunt. Not words. Not even close to words. Pamela's heart sank as understanding dawned. "You can't speak," he grunted again, frustration clear in the sound. Then he stood, and Pamela pressed herself back against the headboard instinctively. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, broad and powerful in a way that spoke of raw, untamed strength. But he didn't approach the bed. Instead, he moved to the small table where she kept her meager supplies and picked up the water pitcher. He held it out to her, his expression questioning. Yes. Thank you." He poured water into her tin cup with surprising care, then brought it to her. His hands were scarred, the knuckles thick with old breaks that had healed crooked. When she took the cup, their fingers brushed, and she felt the calluses on his palms, the heat of his skin. He retreated immediately, giving her space. Pamela drank, her mind racing. A shapeshifter. That's what he had, to be one of the rare alpha bloodlines that could shift between wolf and human form. She'd heard stories, of course. Every Omega had. The great packs of the far north, ruled by shifter alphas, who could track a scent across hundreds of miles, who could command lesser wolves with a thought, who took what they wanted and bowed to no authority but their own strength, and one of them had found her. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. He pointed at her, then at his chest, then made a gesture she didn't understand. Fingers spread, moving in a circle. I don't know what that means." Frustration flickered across his features again. He tried several more gestures, each one incomprehensible to her. Finally, he let out a huff of air and dropped his hands. An awkward silence filled the cabin. Pamela set down the water cup and pulled the furs more securely around herself. "I saved the pup, your pack member. You brought the deer as thanks. The debt is paid. You can go now." He shook his head firmly. "You can't stay here." Another head shake, more emphatic. "I don't want," Pamela stopped herself, changing tactics. "It's not safe for you, or for me. If you're seen here, if people know there's a shifter in these woods, they'll come. Hunters, soldiers, bad people." He moved then, so fast she gasped. In 3 strides he was at the window, and he pointed outside with one hand while tapping his nose with the other. The meaning was clear. He could smell danger long before it arrived. "That's not the point," Pamela argued, though her voice wavered. "I came here to be alone, to be hidden. You being here risks everything." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression softened. He placed a hand over his heart, then extended it toward her, a gesture of, "What? Promise? Protection?" I don't need protection, Pamela said, but even she could hear how hollow it sounded. He raised one dark eyebrow, a distinctly human expression on his wild features, and glanced meaningfully at the bandages on her hands from yesterday's rescue, at the dark circles under her eyes from months of poor sleep and inadequate food, at the cabin itself with its damaged roof and thin walls. Heat flooded Pamela's cheeks. I've been managing fine. He snorted an amused sound that was definitely a laugh, even if it wasn't quite human. You're mocking me. He grinned, and the expression transformed his face entirely. For a moment, he looked almost boyish despite his size and scars. Pamela found herself fighting a smile. This is ridiculous. I don't even know your name. What? He sobered at that, tilting his head in question. Name, Pamela repeated, pointing at herself. Pamela, my name is Pamela. Understanding lit his features. He pointed at her and tried to form the word, his mouth struggling with the human sounds. Sauce. Pamela, she said again, slower. Sarah. Cesara. Close enough. Yes, she pointed at him. And you are? He opened his mouth, and what came out was a sound no human throat could make, a deep, a resonant note that held layers of meaning she couldn't parse. It sounded like wind through trees, like distant thunder, like the howl he'd released this morning. I can't say that, Pamela admitted. He frowned, thinking. Then he moved to the fireplace and used a piece of charcoal from the edge to draw on the hearthstone. The marks were crude but deliberate. A series of lines and curves that might have been letters in some language she didn't know. Pamela climbed out of bed, keeping the fur wrapped around herself, and approached to look. The marks meant nothing to her, but she studied them, trying to find some pattern, some clue. He watched her hopefully. I'm sorry, she said softly. I don't understand. Disappointment flickered across his face. He wiped away the marks with his palm, leaving a black smudge on his skin. An idea occurred to Pamela. She moved to her small shelf of books, precious things she'd carried from her old life. She pulled down a children's primer, one with pictures and simple words. Here, she said, opening it to the first page. A drawing of an apple with the word beneath it. She pointed to the image, then to the word. Apple. He leaned close, studying the page with intense focus. Then he pointed at the word and looked at her questioningly. Yes, that word says apple. It's a fruit, food, she mimed, eating. He nodded slowly, then pointed at the next image, a bird. Bird, Pamela said. He tried to repeat it, the syllable clumsy in his mouth. Bird, she corrected gently. Bird. Better. Something warm unfurled in Pamela's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Here was this massive, dangerous creature, this alpha shifter who could tear her apart with barely an effort, struggling earnestly to learn simple words like a child. You want to learn, she said softly. You want to speak. He met her eyes and nodded, the gesture filled with such naked hope that it made her chest ache. All right, Pamela heard herself say, though part of her screamed that this was foolish, dangerous, exactly what she shouldn't be doing. I'll teach you. But there are rules. He tilted his head, listening. First, the wolves outside, they need to hunt farther away. They can't be seen near the cabin. He grunted agreement. Second, you. She gestured at his ill-fitting clothes. I'll need to make you proper clothing, something that actually fits. He glanced down at himself and had the grace to look slightly sheepish. Third, and this is important. Pamela met his eyes steadily, even though every omega instinct in her screamed to look away from such a dominant gaze. I'm not part of your pack. I'm not available. This is just teaching. Just words. Nothing more. Do you understand? For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. But something in his eyes, something ancient and knowing, suggested he was agreeing to the lesson, not the terms. Pamela told herself that was good enough. She told herself she wasn't making a terrible mistake. She told herself that the flutter in her chest when he smiled at her again was just relief, just gratitude for the deer meat and the extra furs and the promise of protection she absolutely didn't need. She told herself a lot of things. None of them were true. Outside, the pup yipped happily, and the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, flooding the cabin with golden light. The teaching had begun. Chapter 3. Building Connection. The days developed a rhythm. Pamela woke each morning to find the fire already built, wood stacked neatly beside the hearth. He slept outside. She'd tried to offer him the floor by the fire that first night, but he'd refused, choosing instead to curl up on her porch in wolf form. The pup nestled against his side. She told herself she was relieved. Having him inside would have been too intimate, too dangerous. She didn't examine why she checked the window each morning to make sure he was still there. By the third day, she'd managed to take his measurements, an awkward process that involved a lot of gesturing and him standing perfectly still while she wrapped string around his chest, his arms, his waist. He'd watched her face the entire time, those golden eyes tracking every flicker of awareness. Every moment her fingers lingered a heartbeat too long. She'd felt his heat, even through his borrowed shirt, felt the solid muscle beneath, felt her own traitorous body respond to his proximity. When she'd stepped back, he'd made a low sound in his chest, almost a purr, almost a growl, something pleased and knowing. She'd ignored it and thrown herself into sewing. Now, a week after his arrival, she was putting the finishing touches on a proper shirt. The fabric was rough homespun she'd traded for in the last village before fleeing north, meant for winter blankets, but it was sturdy and warm. She'd made it large, accounting for his massive frame, with reinforced seams across the shoulders. He sat at the table where she'd been teaching him, carefully copying letters onto a piece of bark with a charred stick. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his large hands surprisingly deft despite their size. "That's good," Pamela said, glancing at his work. "Your letters are getting clearer." He looked up and smiled, that transformation that made him seem almost gentle. Then he pointed at the word he'd written and looked at her questioningly. "Tree," she confirmed. He nodded and wrote another word, slower this time, checking the primer open beside him. When he finished, he showed her. "Fire." "Yes, excellent." Pamela set down her sewing. "You're learning quickly." He shrugged, but she could see the pleasure in his expression. Then he pointed at himself and tapped the bark, his meaning clear. "What about my name?" "I still can't pronounce what you told me," Pamela admitted. "It's not. Human sounds don't work that way." He frowned, thinking. Then he took the charred stick and wrote slowly, carefully. "Cade." Pamela looked at the letters. "Cade? Can I call you that?" He nodded firmly, then pointed at the word, and at himself. "Cade," he said, the word clearer than anything he'd managed so far. He'd been practicing. "Cade," Pamela repeated, testing it. "It suits you." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes when she said his name. He wrote again, "Pamela. You can already say my name." He pointed more insistently at the word, then at her. "You want to write it?" A nod. He was already copying the letters carefully, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. When he finished, he looked absurdly proud of himself. "Perfect," Pamela said softly, and meant it. The teaching had become the center of her days. Every morning after breakfast, which he insisted on catching, bringing rabbits or fish to her door, they worked on words. Simple things at first. Objects around the cabin. Actions, basic needs. But Cade absorbed language, like dry earth, absorbed rain, desperate and thorough. Within a week, he could string together short sentences. Pamela teach. Cade learn. Good. Within 2 weeks, he could express wants. More words. Need. No more. But he was selective about when he spoke. Often, he'd communicate with gestures or grunts, even when Pamela knew he had the words. It took her several days to understand. He was choosing silence. The words he did speak carried weight because of their rarity. When he said thank you after she gave him the finished shirt, the simple phrase felt like a gift. The shirt fit well, she was pleased to note. He'd put it on immediately, and though he'd looked uncomfortable at first, kept rolling his shoulders, tugging at the sleeves he hadn't taken it off. She suspected it was because she'd made it for him, not because he actually preferred being clothed. Her suspicions were confirmed that evening. She was preparing dinner venison stew from the deer his pack had brought, eked out with wild onions and tubers she'd foraged when she heard splashing from the creek. Curious, she moved to the window. Cade stood in the water, bare-chested, his new shirt draped over a rock on the bank. He was washing, scrubbing at his skin and hair with the harsh lye soap she'd given him. The late afternoon sun turned the water droplets on his body to liquid gold. Pamela knew she should look away, knew she was invading his privacy. She couldn't stop watching. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness or refinement. Every line of him spoke of violence survived, of strength earned through brutal necessity. Scars crossed his back in patterns that told stories, claw marks, bite marks, the puckered evidence of wounds that should have been fatal. He'd survived them all. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and looked directly at the cabin window. At her. Pamela jerked back, heat flooding her face. But not before she saw his smile, amused and knowing. She busied herself with the stew, stirring it far more vigorously than necessary. When he came inside 10 minutes later, shirt back on but unlaced, water still dripping from his hair, she didn't look at him. Just ladled stew into bowls and set them on the table. They ate in silence for a while. Then, "Pamela, angry?" She looked up, surprised. "What? No, I'm not angry." Face red, he gestured at his own cheeks, heart fast. He tapped his ear, reminding her that he could hear such things. "Angry? I'm not." Pamela stopped. "I'm embarrassed." He tilted his head. Rast. It means when you feel foolish or ashamed. I was watching you at the creek, and you saw me, and I felt embarrassed. Why? The question was genuinely curious. Because it's not polite to watch someone when they're bathing. Why not? Pamela fumbled for an explanation. Because bodies are private, personal. You don't just look at someone without permission. Cade considered this, chewing slowly. Then, you can look, I don't mind. The casual way he said it made Pamela's stomach flip. That's not the point. What is point? The point is, she struggled to find words. There are rules, social rules, about what's appropriate between people who aren't, who don't. Not pack, Cade finished. There was something sharp in his tone now. Yes, not pack. He set down his spoon carefully. Pamela, teach words. I learn. But some things. He touched his chest. Here. No words for here things. Feelings, Pamela said quietly. You mean feelings? Feelings. He tested the word. Yes. Feelings. Hard. Words not enough. I know, Pamela admitted. Sometimes words fail. They finished eating in silence, but it felt different now, charged with things unsaid. That night, Pamela couldn't sleep. The cabin felt too warm, too small. Through the window, she could see Cade in wolf form on the porch. The pup whose name she'd learned was Ash curled against him. The mother wolf and the brown male had taken to hunting farther afield, as promised, but they checked in daily. She watched Cade's sides rise and fall with breath, watched the way moonlight turned his black fur silver. He'd told her he didn't mind if she looked. She minded. She minded that she wanted to look, wanted to touch, wanted to know if his skin was as warm as it seemed, if his hair was as soft as it looked when wet. She minded that every day, her carefully constructed isolation felt less like safety and more like loneliness. She minded that when he smiled at her, she forgot why she'd run in the first place. As if sensing her thoughts, Cade's ear twitched, his head raised, and even in the darkness, she could see his eyes find her window. Find her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance. Then Cade lowered his head back to his paws, and Pamela forced herself to turn away from the window. This was just teaching, she reminded herself. Just words. Nothing more. But as she finally drifted to sleep, she could have sworn she heard him whisper her name into the night, soft and reverent, like a prayer or a promise. Pamela. Chapter 4. The Undressing Ritual. The first time it happened, Pamela thought nothing of it. Cade had been helping her repair the roof, holding the ladder steady while she hammered new shingles into place. The work was hard, physical, and by the time the sun began its descent, They were both exhausted and filthy. "You should wash before dinner," Pamela said, wiping sweat from her brow. "There's soap by the creek." Cade nodded and moved toward the door. Then he stopped, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He gestured at his shirt, then at her, his meaning uncertain. "What is it?" He tugged at the laces of his shirt, fumbling with the knots. His fingers, so nimble with a charcoal stick or when hunting, seemed clumsy with the complex closures. After a moment of struggle, he made a frustrated sound and held his arms out to her. "You want me to help?" A nod, sheepish but expectant. Pamela hesitated. "You managed to put it on yourself this morning." He grunted something that might have been an acknowledgement or an excuse, but he didn't lower his arms. "Fine." She crossed to him, trying to ignore the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "But you need to learn to do this yourself." His lips twitched. Almost a smile. Almost something more knowing. The laces had indeed become tangled during the day's work. Pamela worked at the knots carefully, acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, the rise and fall of his chest beneath her hands. When she finally loosened them, she had to pull the shirt up and over his head. Her knuckles brushed against his abdomen. His skin was fever-hot and damp with sweat. Cade raised his arms obediently, allowing her to remove the shirt. For a moment, she was close enough to smell him pine and smoke, and something wild and indefinable that made her omega instincts sing with awareness. She stepped back quickly, thrusting the bundled shirt at him. "There. Now go wash." He took the shirt but didn't move, watching her with those unsettling golden eyes. Then, softly, "Thank you, Pamela." Her name and his deep voice always did something strange to her chest. She'd thought it was a one-time thing. An accident of tangled laces and genuine need for help. But the next evening, when he returned from hunting, he came to the door and waited, arms slightly raised, shirt laced perfectly normally. "Cade, you can—" He just looked at her, patient and immovable as stone. "This is ridiculous. I taught you how the laces work." No response. Just that steady golden gaze. With a huff of exasperation, Pamela moved to help him. The laces came undone easily, too easily. There was nothing wrong with them. He simply wanted her to do it. The shirt came off, and she tried not to notice the play of muscle across his shoulders, the way the fading light painted his scars in sharp relief. "You're doing this on purpose," she accused. He smiled, not sheepish this time, but pleased. "Yes." "Why?" He considered the question, his head tilting. Then, carefully, "Feels good when Pamela touches." Her breath caught. "Cade." "Not wrong thing," he added quickly, as if sensing her objection. "Not mating thing. Just good. Safe good." Pamela didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that his innocent need for touch made her feel anything but safe. By the end of the second week, it had become routine. Every evening before he washed, he would come to her, and she would help him undress. She'd tried refusing once, and he'd simply stood there at the door, patient and immobile, until she'd given in with a muttered curse. The ritual expanded gradually. First it was just the shirt. Then he started fumbling with his belt, the leather strip she'd fashioned to hold up his pants. "Complicated," he'd said, even though she'd seen him undo it smoothly a dozen times when he thought she wasn't watching. She helped anyway, her fingers working the simple buckle while trying desperately not to notice how the waistband of his pants sat low on his hips, revealing a trail of dark hair that disappeared below the fabric. Then came the night he sat down on the porch step and held out his foot. "Cade, no." He wiggled his toes, waiting. "You can take off your own boots." "Hard," he said, though they both knew he was lying. "Pamela, help." She knelt with a groan of surrender and worked the boots off his feet. His legs were corded with muscle, his calves powerful from running in both forms. She tried not to let her hands linger, tried not to notice the way he watched her with that half-lidded gaze that made her feel like prey. Dangerous, delicious prey. "This has to stop," Pamela said one evening as she unlaced his shirt for the dozenth time. Her fingers were trembling slightly from exertion, she told herself. Just from exertion. "You're perfectly capable of undressing yourself." "I know." He caught her wrist gently as she pulled the shirt away, his thumb resting against her pulse point. heart fast again. "Cade, Pamela likes touching?" The question was innocent, curious, devastating. "That's not I don't." She pulled her hand free. "It's not appropriate." That word again. He stood, bare-chested and beautiful in the firelight. "Appropriate means rules, means not allowed." "Yes. Stupid rule," he said flatly, and walked out to wash. Pamela stood alone in the cabin, her hands still warm from his skin, her heart still racing. He was right. It was a stupid rule. That didn't make it any less necessary. The turning point came during a cold snap 2 weeks after his arrival. The temperature dropped sharply overnight, and by morning, frost covered everything. The creek ran sluggish and dark. When Pamela woke, she found Cade had already built the fire up to a roar. But even so, the cabin was barely warm. He came inside at midday, carrying firewood, his breath misting in the air. His shirt was damp from snow, his hair full of ice crystals. "You need to dry off," Pamela said. "You'll freeze." He set down the wood and came to her automatically, arms raised. But when she touched his shirt, she gasped. The fabric was frozen, stiff, icy against her fingers. His skin beneath was shockingly cold. "Cade, you're freezing. How long were you out there?" He shrugged. "Needed wood. For Pamela. Keep warm." Something cracked in her chest. He'd been out in the brutal cold gathering wood for her comfort, and he'd let himself freeze doing it. "Come here." She pulled him closer to the fire, her earlier reservations forgotten. "We need to get you warm. Now." She worked at his shirt with urgent fingers, but the laces were frozen, the knots impossible. Frustrated, she grabbed her knife and simply cut through them. "Pamela." He looked genuinely shocked. "I'll fix it later." Arms up. The shirt came off in pieces, and Pamela's stomach dropped. His skin was pale with cold, his lips tinged blue. She'd seen frostbite before, had lost a pack member to it once. This was dangerous. "Pants too. Everything. You need to warm up completely." For once, he didn't tease or play games. He understood the urgency in her voice. He stripped quickly while she grabbed every blanket in the cabin, including the precious furs from her bed. When he was naked, she wrapped him in layers and pushed him down to sit directly in front of the fire. Then she knelt behind him and began rubbing his arms, his shoulders, trying to bring circulation back to his extremities. "Foolish man," she muttered as she worked. "Staying out in that cold. You could have died. Worth it." His voice was rough. "Pamela, warm, safe. I'm not worth your life, you stubborn." She stopped, her throat tight. "You can't do things like this. You can't risk yourself for me." He turned to look at her, and there was something fierce in his golden eyes. "Will, Pamela is." He struggled for the word, his frustration clear. Finally, important. Most important. "I'm just teaching you words, Cade. That's all this is." "No." The word was firm, absolute. He took her hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. Even through the blankets, she could feel the strong, steady beat. "Here, Pamela, here." Not just words. She should pull away, should remind him of the boundaries, the rules, the appropriate distance between teacher and student. Instead, she let her hand rest against his chest, feeling his heart beat against her palm, feeling the cold slowly leave his body. "You can't stay forever," she whispered. "You know that, don't you? Eventually, someone will find us, find me. And when they do, fight," Cade said simply. "Keep Pamela safe. Always. You can't fight an entire kingdom." His smile was sharp, feral, full of promise. "Watch." They stayed like that as the afternoon faded, her kneeling behind him, her hands on his shoulders, rubbing warmth back into his frozen skin. He leaned back slightly, resting his weight against her, trusting her to hold him. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. This wasn't about undressing anymore. Wasn't about games or teasing or breaking down her walls through persistence. This was about trust. About care. About two isolated souls finding comfort in each other's presence. When he was finally warm, when the color had returned to his skin and his shivering had stopped, he turned in the circle of her arms. "Thank you," he said, and leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. The gesture was so gentle, so reverent, that Pamela felt tears prick at her eyes. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, sharing warmth, not speaking because no words were necessary. Outside, the winter wind howled. Inside, something between them shifted and settled into place, something that felt dangerously like belonging. Chapter 5. The grooming scene. The idea came to Pamela one morning as she watched Cade attempt to tie back his hair. His hair had grown wild during his time in the forest, long, tangled, full of knots and debris. He'd been trying to keep it out of his face while they worked on reinforcing the cabin's west wall, but his fingers kept fumbling with the leather cord. Finally, he gave up with a frustrated growl and let it fall around his face in a dark curtain. "Come here," Pamela said, setting down her hammer. He approached warily, as if sensing this was different from their usual interactions. She gestured to the stool near the fire. "Sit." He obeyed, lowering himself onto the seat, and Pamela moved to stand behind him. This close, she could see just how matted and tangled his hair had become. It must have been months since it had been properly cared for, maybe years. "I'm going to cut it," she announced. He went rigid. "Cut?" "Not all of it. Just trim it. Make it manageable. It'll be easier to take care of." When he didn't respond, she added gently, "I won't hurt you. I promise." Slowly, his shoulders relaxed. A nod. Pamela fetched her shears, small, sharp scissors she used for sewing, and a comb carved from bone. She started with the comb, working carefully through the tangles, starting at the ends and moving gradually upward. Cade sat perfectly still, like a wild animal allowing itself to be approached. She could feel the tension in him, the predator's instinct to move, to fight, to flee, but he stayed, trusting her. "Tell me if I hurt you," she murmured. A grunt of acknowledgement. She worked in silence for a while, her fingers gentle as they separated the knots. Some were so bad she had to cut them out. But slowly, gradually, his hair began to flow smoothly through her fingers. It was softer than she'd expected, thick and dark as midnight, with a slight wave to it when it wasn't tangled. Beautiful. As she worked, she became aware of the intimacy of the act, her fingers in his hair, her body close behind his, the quiet sounds of their breathing in the warm cabin. This was different from the undressing ritual that had been charged with tension, with unspoken desire. This was tender. She began to trim carefully, taking off just enough to even out the ragged ends and remove the damaged sections. As she worked, her fingers brushed against his neck, his ears, the strong line of his jaw. Each touch sent a little spark through her. Cade's breathing had deepened, slowed. His eyes were half closed, his expression one of complete relaxation. A low rumble started in his chest, almost a purr, almost the sound a contented wolf might make. "Does that feel good?" Pamela asked softly. The sound was pure satisfaction. No one, long time, since someone, he struggled for words. "Care for me. Like this." Pamela's hands stilled for a moment, her chest tight. "How long have you been alone?" "Years." His voice was quiet, distant. "After Mother died. Father wanted me dead too. Ran. Lived with wolves. He touched his chest. Pack. Family. But not same. Not human touch." "I'm sorry," Pamela whispered. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head slightly, careful not to disturb her work. "Not your fault. And now, not alone anymore." The simple statement lodged somewhere behind Pamela's ribs. She finished the trim and stepped back to examine her work. His hair now fell just past his shoulders, clean and even, framing his face in dark waves. "Much better," she said. "But there's one more thing." She moved to stand in front of him, and his eyes opened fully, tracking her. She lifted the shears. "Your beard, may I?" He reached up self-consciously to touch the wild growth covering his jaw and neck. It was as untamed as his hair had been, thick and uneven, hiding most of his face. After a moment, he nodded. Pamela fetched her small mirror, one of the few luxuries she'd brought with her, and angled it so he could see himself. His eyes widened slightly at his reflection, as if he'd forgotten what he looked like. "I'm going to trim it close," she explained. "It'll be more comfortable, cleaner. But I need you to hold very still. The blade is sharp." She expected him to tense again, to show some sign of nervousness at having a knife near his throat. Instead, he relaxed completely. His eyes locked on hers, calm and trusting. Pamela swallowed hard and knelt before him. From this position, with him seated and her kneeling, they were nearly eye level. She could see the flecks of amber in his golden irises, could count each dark lash, could feel the warmth of his breath. She reached up with one hand to cup his jaw, tilting his face to catch the light. His skin was warm beneath her palm, rough with stubble. She felt him swallow, felt the movement of muscle and tendon beneath her fingers. With her other hand, she brought the shears close and began to carefully trim away the bulk of the beard. Cade watched her face the entire time. Not the blade, not her hands, her face. His gaze was intense, unwavering, as if he was memorizing every detail. The small scar on her left eyebrow, the way she caught her bottom lip between her teeth when she concentrated, the flush that crept up her neck under his scrutiny. "Stop staring," she murmured, not looking at him. "Can't." The word was simple, honest. "Pamela, beautiful." Her hands trembled slightly. "Cade." "True," he insisted. "Most beautiful thing I ever see. You're trying to distract me." "No, trying to tell truth." He paused. Scared. If not say now, maybe never say. Pamela forced herself to focus on her work, trimming carefully around his mouth, his chin. "Scared of what?" "That Pamela leave. That Pamela send me away. That Pamela." He swallowed again. "That Pamela never know how I—" Another pause, longer this time. No words for it. The feeling. Her hands stilled. She looked up to meet his eyes. "Don't," she said softly. "Please don't." "Why not?" "Because I can't." The words came out more desperately than she'd intended. "I can't stay here. This isn't a life, Cade. This is hiding, running. Eventually, they'll find me, and when they do, then I fight." "You can't fight a king." Pamela pulled back, setting down the shears with shaking hands. "You don't understand. The man hunting me, he's not just any alpha. He's the Alpha King of the Southern Territories. He has armies. He has packs that span 1,000 miles. He's killed 3 Omega wives already, and I'm supposed to be the 4th. I ran because the alternative was death." Cade's expression had gone very still, very cold. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "This king, what his name?" "Aldrich." "Why does it—" "Aldrich Bloodmoon." It wasn't a question. The way he said it, flat, certain, full of old rage, made Pamela's blood run cold. "You know him. He killed my mother." Cade's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Queen Lyanna of the Northern Territories. She was his first wife. He claimed political alliance. Then his jaw worked. She was Omega. Like you. He used her to legitimize his rule over the North. When she gave him no children after 3 years, he didn't finish. He didn't need to." Pamela felt the room tilt. You're the lost prince. The heir to the Northern Territories." Was Prince, now just Cade. He looked at her, and something fierce burned in his eyes. "But still Alpha. Still strong. And now I know the Omega he hunts is mine. I'm not." He moved faster than she could react. One moment he was sitting. The next, he was kneeling before her, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted his intensity. "Pamela," he said, and her name in his mouth was a prayer, a claim, a promise. "From the moment you pulled ash from the water, you were mine. From the moment you opened your door to me, you were mine. You teach me words, but my heart already knows its truth." "This is too fast," Pamela whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "We barely know each other. I know enough. You are brave, kind, strong. You save a pup, even though it risk everything. You teach a wild man words, even though he can't give you nothing in return. You've given me everything." Pamela interrupted, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "The deer, the wood, The protection. She struggled to name it. The not being alone. Cade's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Then let me give you more. Let me give you safety. Freedom. He stopped, leaning forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His forehead rested against hers. That gesture she was beginning to understand meant everything to him. Connection. Trust. Belonging. Let me love you, he finished in a whisper. If you let me, I will. I think maybe already do. Pamela's breath shattered. Every sensible part of her screamed to push him away, to maintain distance, to remember all the reasons this was impossible. But she was so tired of being sensible, so tired of running, so tired of being alone. Instead of pushing him away, she tilted her face up. Their lips met softly, tentatively, a question and an answer all at once. Cade made a sound deep in his chest, surprise and relief, and hunger all tangled together. His hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her hair, holding her close but not trapping her, always giving her the choice. She chose to kiss him back. The kiss deepened slowly, a gradual exploration rather than a desperate claiming. His lips were softer than she'd expected, gentle despite the desire she could feel thrumming through him. He tasted like pine and smoke, and something wild that made her omega instincts sing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers again. Pamela, he murmured. I know, she whispered back. I know. She reached up with trembling fingers to finish what she'd started. The beard came away in careful strokes, revealing the strong line of his jaw, the fullness of his lips, the sharp beauty of his features. When she was done, she sat back to look at him. Without the wild hair and untamed beard, he was devastating. The scars that marked his face only added to his beauty, evidence of a hard life survived, of strength that hadn't broken under impossible pressure. There, she said softly, now I can see you. He caught her wrist gently and brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her pulse point, that place where her heartbeat betrayed every feeling she tried to hide. And I see you, he replied. All of you. And I'm not afraid of what I see. Outside, the wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of snow. Inside, everything had changed. Pamela knew she should be terrified, knew that this changed nothing about the danger they faced, about the impossibility of their situation. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Chapter 6. The danger. 3 days passed in a strange golden haze. Cade didn't push for more than she'd given him. He still slept on the porch in wolf form, still maintained the respectful distance she'd insisted on from the beginning. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Now, when she helped him undress for his evening wash, his eyes held heat that he didn't try to hide. When their fingers brushed during language lessons, neither of them pulled away quickly. When she woke in the mornings, she'd find him sitting in wolf form just outside her window, watching over her sleep, protecting her. On the 4th morning, Pamela woke to silence again, but not the dangerous kind from that first morning. This was simply absence. Cade was gone. She told herself it was fine. He was a wolf, an alpha, a creature of the forest. He needed to run, to hunt, to be wild. She couldn't expect him to stay tethered to her cabin indefinitely, but as morning stretched into afternoon, then afternoon into evening, unease began to curl in her stomach. Ash was gone too. So was the mother wolf, Lyra, Cade had called her. Only the large brown male, Bobby, remained, pacing the tree line with anxious energy. Where did they go? Pamela asked him, though she knew he couldn't answer. Bobby whined and looked north, toward the deeper forest. By the 2nd day of Cade's absence, Pamela's unease had crystallized into genuine worry. By the 3rd day, it had transformed into something sharper, more desperate, fear. She caught herself checking the forest every few minutes, listening for the sound of paws on the porch, the low rumble of his voice. The cabin felt too empty, too quiet. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, the way he took up space, the sounds of him moving around outside, the security of knowing he was near. Without him, she felt exposed, vulnerable. On the 3rd evening, Pamela made a decision. She would go hunting not because she needed the food, they still had plenty from Cade's recent kills, but because she needed to do something, needed to prove to herself that she was still capable, still independent, still the survivor who'd made it this far alone. She gathered her bow and quiver, told Bobby where she was going. He looked disapproving but didn't try to stop her, and headed into the forest. The late afternoon was cold and clear, the kind of weather that made sound carry for miles. Pamela moved carefully, quietly, following a game trail she'd scouted weeks ago. Fresh deer tracks marked the soft earth, a small group, maybe 4 or 5 animals, moving toward the stream for evening water. She was so focused on tracking that she didn't hear the horses until it was too late. Waste of time. She's not out here. Probably dead already. Pamela's blood turned to ice. She dropped low behind a fallen log, barely breathing. Through the gaps in the wood, she could see them. 3 men on horseback, wearing the black and gold of the Southern Territories. The Alpha King's guard. The king wants her found, another voice said. This one was older, harder. Dead or alive. He wants proof. Too many rumors about an Omega living in these mountains. Even if it's her, what does it matter? 1 Omega, more or less. This one ran. The hard voice carried weight, authority. Made him look weak. The king doesn't forgive that kind of insult. Pamela pressed herself flatter against the log, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they'd hear it. Her bow was useless, she was outnumbered, outmatched. If they found her, she was dead, or worse, taken back. The horses moved closer, too close. Spread out, the older voice commanded. Search the area. She's got to have some kind of shelter nearby. Boot hit the ground. Then another. The men were dismounting. Pamela looked up desperately. The tree above her had low branches. If she could climb silently enough, she might hide in the canopy. It was a slim chance, but better than staying on the ground. She moved carefully, slowly, reaching for the lowest branch. A twig snapped under her foot. The sound was impossibly loud in the quiet forest. There! Pamela ran. She abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through the underbrush, her only thought to get distance, to find cover, to survive. Behind her, she heard shouting, the sound of men giving chase. It's her, the Omega. Don't let her escape. Pamela's lungs burned. Her legs pumped desperately. The forest blurred around her as she ran, dodging trees, leaping over roots, pure survival instinct driving her forward. An arrow whistled past her head. Another buried itself in a tree trunk inches from her shoulder. They were hurting her, she realized with horror. Driving her away from the cabin, away from any possible shelter, toward the cliff. Pamela skidded to a stop at the edge of a rocky outcrop that dropped 30 feet to a boulder-strewn slope below. No way down. No escape. She spun, knocking an arrow with shaking hands, as the 3 men emerged from the forest. The older one, grizzled, scarred, with the look of a veteran hunter, smiled coldly. Nowhere left to run, girl. Stay back, Pamela warned, drawing her bow. I'll shoot. You'll try. He drew his own bow casually. But I've been hunting Omegas longer than you've been alive. I know exactly how far you'll get before your instincts betray you. He was right, and they both knew it. Omegas weren't built for violence, for aggression. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to submit, to make herself small, to defer to the alphas before her. She drew anyway, aiming at his chest. Feisty, one of the younger guards laughed. The king will beat that out of her. If we bring her back alive, the third guard said. Draven, maybe we should just... His words cut off in a wet gurgle. Pamela watched in frozen horror as blood bloomed across the guard's throat, as he dropped to his knees, as a massive black shape materialized behind him. Cade. He was in wolf form, bigger than she'd ever seen him. His lips pulled back in a snarl that exposed teeth like daggers. Blood dripped from his muzzle, the guard's blood. The other young guard screamed and reached for his sword. He didn't get it halfway from its sheath before Cade was on him. The attack was brutal. Efficient throat torn out in a single snap of powerful jaws. The guard fell without another sound. Draven, the older hunter, didn't panic. He pivoted smoothly, drawing a long knife from his belt. his stance shifting to something defensive and experienced. "Well," he said calmly, even as his companions bled out at his feet. "The lost prince of the north. I should have known." Cade's snarl deepened, a sound that vibrated through the ground. "You don't remember me, do you, boy?" Draven circled slowly, keeping his knife between himself and the wolf. "I was your father's hunter, tracked your mother's bloodline for him, found all her weaknesses. I was there the night he killed her." Kade lunged, but Draven was ready. He twisted aside, and his knife flashed, and buried itself in Cade's side. Cade yelped, a sound of pain that tore through Pamela's chest like a physical blow. He staggered, and she saw the blade still protruding from his ribs, saw the way he favored his wounded side. "Wolf's bane extract," Draven said conversationally. "Enough to kill a shifter in minutes. I've been carrying it for 20 years, just in case." He turned to Pamela. "Now, girl, you're going to come with me quietly, or you're going to watch him die slow." Cade tried to lunge again, but his legs buckled. He was transforming involuntarily, his body writhing between forms, unable to maintain either shape with poison coursing through his system. "Stop!" Pamela screamed. She dropped her bow and held up her hands. "Stop, I'll come with you. Just help him. Please." Draven laughed. "Help him? Why would I?" An arrow sprouted from his shoulder. The hunter spun, snarling, and another arrow buried itself in his thigh. Bobby burst from the forest, not as a wolf, but as a man, a bow in his hands and murder in his eyes. "Run, Pamela," Bobby shouted. "Get Cade out of here." Draven drew his own bow with his good arm, impossibly fast despite his wounds. The arrow flew, and took Bobby in the chest. The brown wolf who'd been guarding her cabin, who'd brought them fish and watched the perimeter, who'd been loyal and steady, he fell. "No!" Pamela ran toward him, but Draven caught her, his hand closing around her throat. "Enough," he snarled. "You're coming with me, and the prince can die here knowing he failed too." His words choked off. Cade, barely able to stand, human now, and bleeding from the wound in his side, had driven Draven's own knife into the hunter's kidney. "Never," Kade gasped. "Touch her." Draven fell. And this time, he didn't get back up. Pamela ran to Cade as he collapsed. The knife wound in his side was deep, bleeding freely, and his skin had taken on a gray pallor that terrified her. "Cade? No. Stay with me." "Bobby," he managed. "Check Bobby." She didn't want to leave him, but she forced herself to crawl to where Bobby had fallen. One look told her everything. The arrow had pierced his lung, and blood frothed at his lips. His eyes found hers, and something like peace settled in them. "Protect the prince," he whispered. "He's the true king." Then the light faded, and Bobby was gone. Pamela choked on a sob and turned back to Cade. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and rapid. The poison was working fast. She had to get him back to the cabin. Had to try to save him. With strength born of desperation, Pamela got her shoulder under his arm, and half dragged, half carried him through the forest. He was impossibly heavy, and blood left a trail behind them, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Lyra and Ash found them halfway back, drawn by the scent of blood. They flanked Pamela, and Lyra transformed a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and her son's golden gaze. "Let me help," she said, taking Cade's other side. Together, they got him back to the cabin as night fell, and the first snow began to fall. Pamela's hands shook as she laid him on her bed, as she cut away his clothes to reach the wound, as she saw just how deep the knife had gone. Wolf's bane. She'd heard of it, a poison that was fatal to shifters, that attacked their ability to heal, that shut down their systems one by one. She had no idea how to fight it, but she would try. She would try until her last breath, because losing him wasn't an option she could survive. Like this video, if you believe Pamela and Cade deserve to survive this. Chapter 7. The Healing and Claiming. The poison was winning. Pamela had done everything she knew how to do. She'd cleaned the wound, packed it with herbs that were supposed to draw out toxins, wrapped it in clean cloth. She'd brewed teas from every medicinal plant she had, yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, even the bitter golden seal root she'd been saving for emergencies. Nothing worked. Cade's fever climbed steadily through the night. His skin burned under her hands, his breathing grew more labored. Twice he seized, his body convulsing violently while she held him down and helplessly watched. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but that wasn't a good sign. His shifter healing should have closed it by now. The poison was preventing his body from doing what it was designed to do. Lyra had left at midnight to find help, transforming and racing north into the deep forest where older shifters lived, those who might know ancient remedies. She'd taken Ash with her, keeping him safe from what was coming. Pamela refused to think about what was coming. She sat beside Cade's bed as dawn approached, her hand clasped around his. His fingers were limp in hers, no longer squeezing back when she spoke to him. "You have to fight," she whispered hoarsely. Her voice was raw from hours of talking to him, telling him stories, begging him to stay. "Please, Cade. You promised you'd protect me. You can't protect me if you're gone." His only response was a shallow, rattling breath. Pamela pressed her forehead to their joined hands and finally let herself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so raw inside her that she'd forgotten it existed. She'd spent 3 months not crying, not feeling, not allowing herself to be anything but numb. But this losing him, it shattered every wall she'd built. "I love you," she choked out. "I know it's too soon. I know it's impossible. But I do. I love you, and you can't leave me. Not now. Not when I just found you." Cade's breathing stuttered. Stopped. "No." Pamela's head snapped up. "No, no, no, Cade." His chest wasn't moving. Without thinking, Pamela slammed her fist down on his sternum hard, the way she'd seen a healer do once when a pack member had stopped breathing after nearly drowning. Nothing. She hit him again, harder, desperation making her strong. "Breathe," she screamed at him. "Don't you dare die on me." She pressed her hands to his chest and pushed in sharp, rhythmic compressions, the way the healer had done. She had no idea if it would work on a shifter, had no idea if she was doing it right, but she couldn't just watch him die. 15 compressions. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. His lips were cold against hers. 15 more compressions. Another breath. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, Cade. Come back to me." She was reaching to start another round when he gasped a horrible, wet, desperate sound, and his eyes flew open. "Pamela." She collapsed against him, crying so hard she couldn't speak, her hands fisted in the blankets on either side of his body. He was breathing. His heart was beating again under her ear. He was alive. His hand came up weakly to touch her hair. "Don't cry. You died," she said between sobs. "Your heart stopped. You died, and I thought, still here." His voice was barely a whisper. "Still. Yours." She pulled back to look at him. His color was better, not good, but better. His eyes, though clouded with pain, were focused on her face. "The poison?" she asked. "Still there. But..." He swallowed with effort. "Heard you. Came back. For you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You stubborn, impossible man." He managed the ghost of a smile. "You're stubborn man." Over the next hours, Pamela watched him fight. The fever didn't break, but it stopped climbing. His breathing remained labored, but it didn't stop again. Slowly, painfully, his body began to win against the poison. By midday, he was strong enough to drink water. By evening, he could eat a little broth. Pamela never left his side. She bathed him with cool water when his fever spiked, changed his bandages, helped him drink, held his hand through the waves of pain, and she talked to him, told him about her life before the pack she'd been born into. Her family. The day the Alpha King's representatives had come to claim her as his intended mate. Told him about the escape, the fear, the months of running. "My father traded me," she said quietly as she wrung out a cloth to cool his forehead. "Like I was livestock." The alliance with the Southern Territories was worth more to him than his own daughter. Cade's hand tightened on hers. "Never," he rasped. "Never let anyone trade you. claim you. You're not property. That's not how the world works for Omegas. Then, world is wrong. He pulled her hand to his lips with effort, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. When I'm stronger, we change it. She wanted to tell him that was impossible. That one alpha, even one who was apparently a lost prince, couldn't change centuries of tradition, of ingrained hierarchy, of Omegas being treated as possessions. But the fierce determination in his eyes made her believe, just for a moment, that maybe he could. By the second day, Cade could sit up with help. By the third, he could stand, though the effort left him shaking and pale. Pamela helped him to the chair by the fire, then knelt to check his wound. It was finally healing, slowly, far slower than a shifter's wounds normally would, but healing nonetheless. The edges had closed, the angry red fading to pink. "You're going to have another scar," she said, running her fingers gently around the puckered skin. "Good." His hand covered hers, holding it against his side. "Reminder that I almost lost you." "I almost lost you," Pamela corrected. She looked up at him. "Cade, Bobby, I know." Pain flickered across his features, and not the physical kind. He was good wolf, good man, loyal. He died protecting us. "I know," Cade repeated, his voice rough. "I will honor him, remember him, when I take back the North." He paused. "I will make sure everyone knows what he did, when, not if." He really believed he could reclaim his birthright, and maybe he could. "Tell me," Pamela said softly. "Tell me what happened. With your mother, your father. All of it." So he did. Told her about growing up in the palace. About his mother's gentle kindness. About the day he'd realized his father saw her as a tool, not a mate. About the night he'd woken to screams and found his mother's broken body. About his father standing over her with blood on his hands. He said, "She was weak," Cade said, staring into the fire. "That Omega was mistake. Couldn't give him strong pups. So he stopped, his jaw clenching. I attacked him. 11 years old. Attacked. My own father." "Of course you did. He should have killed me. Would have. But his beta. Draven." He said the name like a curse. "Draven convinced him. I was too young, too weak, to bother with. So father let me run. Thought I'd die in forest. But you didn't. No. Found wolf pack. Real wolves, not shifters. They took me, raised me, taught me to survive, to hunt, to be alpha." He looked at her. "For years, only. Spoke wolf. Forgot human words. Became more wolf than man. Until you found me. Until you found me." He reached out to cup her face. Ash was playing by creek. Fell in. Couldn't get out. Was going to save him myself. But then, his thumb stroked her cheek. "Saw you. Omega woman. Alone. Brave. Jumped into freezing water. For pup. She didn't know. I couldn't just let him drown. Could have. Most would." His eyes were intense. "But you chose mercy. Chose kindness. Even though it risked everything." Pamela felt her breath catch. "You were watching. That whole time." "Yes. And I knew. This Omega. She was different. Special. Had to. Know her. Protect her. Keep her. Safe. So you came back. Couldn't stay. Away." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers in that gesture she'd come to cherish. "From the moment you saved Ash, you had my loyalty. But from the moment you let me in, you had my heart." Pamela's hands came up to frame his face, feeling the rough stubble that had grown during his illness, the heat of his skin as his fever finally, fully broke. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When you were dying, I couldn't the thought of losing you. I'm here, He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Still here, still yours, always, will be. The kiss was different this time. Not tentative or questioning, but certain. A claiming on both sides. A promise made and received. Cade's hand slid into her hair, holding her close but not trapping, always giving her the choice to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she pressed closer, her body fitting against his as if designed for this exact purpose. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers again. "I need you," he said simply. "Not. Want. Need. You are. Air. Water. Everything." Pamela's hands trembled as they moved from his face to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had stopped, that had come back because she'd refused to let him go. "This isn't proper," she said, but there was no conviction in her words. "Don't care." His hands moved to her waist. "Human customs don't matter. You are my mate. In here." He pressed her hand over his heart. "Where it matters. Cade, you're still healing." "Don't care," he repeated, more firmly. His eyes held heat now, desire burning through the exhaustion. "Almost died, came back. To you, only you, need to. Show you. How much. You mean." His hands were already working at the laces of her dress, his fingers steadier than they'd been in days, driven by need rather than strength. Pamela knew she should stop this, should make him rest, should maintain the boundaries they'd been dancing around for weeks. But she'd almost lost him, and suddenly, propriety seemed like the most ridiculous, meaningless thing in the world. She helped him with her laces. The dress fell away, and Cade made a low sound in his throat. Appreciation, hunger, reverence, all mixed together. His hands trembled as they traced the curve of her waist, her hips, mapping her body with a gentleness that belied the heat in his eyes. "Beautiful," he murmured. "So beautiful. Can't believe you're real. Mine." "Not yours yet," Pamela said, but her voice was breathless. "Then let me fix that." He pulled her into his lap carefully, mindful of his wound. And Pamela went willingly. This close, she could feel every inch of him, could see the scars that covered his body, could smell the scent that her Omega instincts recognized as home. Mate. When he claimed her, it was with a gentleness that made her cry. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word in a mixture of human language and wolf sounds, she somehow understood. All of it spoke of devotion, of protection, of a bond forming between them that went deeper than words. "I love you," she gasped as pleasure built. "Cade, I love you." His response was a growl that held more meaning than any human words could carry. "Mine. Mate. Forever." When they finally stilled, tangled together in the firelight, Pamela felt something settle in her chest. Something that had been restless and frightened for months. Peace. Cade pressed a kiss to her temple, her cheek, her lips. Then he pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were serious despite the satisfaction radiating from him. "No more running," he said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Stay. With me. Let me. Protect you. Love you. Always." Pamela traced the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "What about your father? The king? Draven's death when they find the bodies? Let them come." The words were fierce now, strong despite his weakened state. "I am Alpha. True Alpha. I have pack, territory. And now." He pulled her impossibly closer. "I have mate. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for." "Don't you dare die again," Pamela said, only half joking. He smiled. "Don't plan to. Have too much. To live. For now." Outside, the snow fell softly. Inside, the fire crackled. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, they both knew it wasn't. The Alpha King would come, others would come, the world would demand answers, would challenge their bond, would try to tear them apart, but they would face it together. And that made all the difference. Epilogue. The Exodus. Lyra returned on the morning of the 5th day. She wasn't alone. Pamela heard them before she saw them, the sound of many feet moving through the forest, the rustle of dozens of bodies disturbing the underbrush. She tensed, reaching instinctively for the knife she now kept at her belt. But Cade's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "It's all right," he said. His voice was stronger now, the words coming more easily. "Their pack." Pamela moved to the window and felt her breath catch. Wolves emerged from the tree line, dozens of them, in both animal and human form. But these weren't the normal wolves that had accompanied Cade. These were all shifters, and the power rolling off them was palpable even from a distance. At their head walked a woman who could only be royalty. She was tall and regal, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same golden eyes as Cade. She moved with an authority that made even the massive male alphas flanking her seem deferential. When she spotted the cabin, her pace quickened. Cade stood, still moving carefully, and opened the door. The woman's composure cracked when she saw him. "Caden. Aunt Rhea." His voice held warmth Pamela had never heard before. Rhea crossed the distance in 3 strides, and pulled him into a careful embrace, mindful of his healing wound. "We thought you were dead. All these years we thought." Her voice broke. "Your father told us the wolves had killed you." "Father wanted me dead," Cade corrected quietly. "The wolves saved me." Rhea pulled back, her hands framing his face. "You look so much like her, like Lyanna." Then her golden gaze shifted to Pamela, standing uncertainly in the doorway. "And who is this? And who is this?" Cade held out his hand to Pamela. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, letting him pull her to his side. "This is Pamela," he said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "My mate." A murmur ran through the assembled shifters. Rhea's eyebrows rose, but her expression warmed. "Your mate." She studied Pamela with an intensity that made her want to fidget. "An Omega. Like your mother was." "Yes." Cade's arm wrapped around Pamela's waist, protective and possessive. "Pamela saved my life. More than once." "Did she now?" Rhea's lips quirked. "Then I am in her debt." She inclined her head to Pamela, a gesture of respect that shocked her. "Welcome to the family, child." Pamela found her voice. "Family? Caden is the last of the Northern Royal line," Rhea explained, "which makes him heir to the territories his father stole. And if you are his mate," she smiled, "then you are our future queen." The word hit Pamela like a physical blow. "I'm not, I can't." "She doesn't have to be anything," Cade cut in firmly. "Except mine. The rest, we figure out together." Rhea nodded approvingly. Spoken like a true alpha. She gestured to the shifters behind her. "We've been scattered for 15 years, waiting for this moment. When Lyra brought word that you were alive, that you'd been poisoned, defending your mate, we came as fast as we could." An older man stepped forward, scarred and grizzled, with kind eyes. "We brought healers, my prince, and supplies, whatever you need. Thank you, Darius." Cade nodded to him. "But the worst has passed, Pamela." He looked down at her with such open affection that her cheeks warmed. "Pamela pulled me back from death itself. Then we owe her twice over," Darius said with a bow. Over the next hours, the cabin that had housed only Pamela's solitude became the center of a gathering storm. The shifters made camp in the surrounding forest, careful to stay hidden from any potential scouts. Healers examined Cade's wound and pronounced themselves impressed with Pamela's work. Provisions appeared: fresh meat, winter supplies, even clothing and weapons. Through it all, Pamela felt increasingly overwhelmed. These people looked at Cade with reverence, with hope. They called him, "My prince," and "Your Highness," and they clearly expected him to lead them against the southern territories. Against the Alpha King who had murdered his mother and stolen his throne. They expected him to become king, and they expected her to stand beside him as queen. The thought terrified her. That evening, as the shifters gathered around multiple fires outside, Pamela found herself alone in the cabin with Cade and Rhea. "You're afraid," Rhea said gently. It wasn't a question. Pamela nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." The older woman's response surprised her. Fear means you understand the weight of what's ahead. Only fools rush into war without fear. War, Pamela repeated hollowly. That's what this will be, Rhea confirmed. Aldrich won't give up the Northern Territories without a fight. He's held them for 15 years. Built his empire on the backs of the Pax who were loyal to Lyanna. When word spreads that her son lives, she smiled grimly. Those Pax will rise, and Aldrich will have to respond. People will die. Yes, Rhea didn't soften it. War is death, but sometimes death is necessary to stop greater evil. Cade, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Pamela doesn't have to be part of this. If she wants, I can send her somewhere safe. Somewhere far from the fighting. Both women turned to stare at him. You would do that? Rhea asked carefully. Send your mate away? To keep her safe? Yes. His jaw was set. Stubborn. She ran from Aldrich once. She shouldn't have to. Face him again. Because of me. Pamela crossed the room to stand before him. You stubborn, selfless man. Do you really think I'd let you send me away? Pamela, I ran once, she cut him off. I was terrified and alone, and I ran because I had no other choice. But I'm not alone anymore. She took his hands in hers. I'm not powerless, and I'm not leaving you to face this without me. You could die. So, could you? She squeezed his hands. That's what scared me most when you were poisoned. Not that I might die, but that you might. That I'd lose you. She met his eyes steadily. If you're going to war, then I'm going with you. As your mate. As... She glanced at Rhea. As whatever else you need me to be. Rhea was smiling now. Oh, I like her. Lyanna would have liked her too. Cade pulled Pamela into his arms, pressing his face into her hair. You're sure? He murmured. Once we leave here, there's no going back. No more hiding. No more running. I'm sure. And surprisingly, she was. No more running. The decision made, plans began in earnest. They would leave at dawn, moving north toward the heart of the old Northern Territories. There, in the ancient stronghold of Shadow Peak, they would gather the scattered Pax, consolidate their forces, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Aldrich. But first, there were goodbyes to make. Pamela stood by Bobby's grave, a simple mound of stones near the cabin, marked with his favorite hunting knife planted point down in the earth. Ash sat beside her in wolf form, his young face solemn. I'm sorry, she told the pup. He died protecting us, protecting you. Ash whined softly, pressing against her leg. We'll remember him, Cade said, coming to stand beside her. In the north, we have tradition. When warrior dies, we tell their story. Keep their name alive. Bobby's story will be told. Promise. Pamela nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That night, she and Cade sat together on the porch one last time, watching the stars wheel overhead. The cabin had been her sanctuary, her hiding place, her prison, and her salvation all at once. Now it was time to leave it behind. Regrets? Cade asked softly. Pamela thought about it. About the quiet months alone, the desperate fear that had driven her here, the walls she'd built around her heart. No, she said finally. If I hadn't come here, I never would have found you, or you wouldn't have found me. Fate, Cade said. Lyra says. The moon goddess brings mates together. No matter how far apart they start, no matter what stands between them. Do you believe that? He turned to look at her, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight from inside the cabin. I believe. You saved Ash, and that brought me to you. I believe. You taught me words, and that made me human again. I believe. He cupped her face gently. I believe every step, everything that happened, led me here, to you. So yes, I believe in fate. Pamela leaned into his touch. I love you. I love you too. The words still came awkwardly to him, but they were sincere. Always will. Even when I don't have words to say it. They stayed like that until the moon set and the eastern sky began to lighten. When dawn broke, the exodus began. Pamela packed her few possessions, the books Cade had learned from, her mother's necklace, the hunting knife that had been her father's before he'd traded her away. She left behind the fear, the isolation, the belief that she had to face the world alone. Cade took one last look around the cabin, then deliberately removed his shirt and left it draped over the chair. When Pamela raised an eyebrow, he grinned. "More comfortable," he said, but they both knew the truth. He was choosing wildness, choosing to be himself, not civilized, not tamed, but free. And she loved him for it. Lyra approached in human form, Ash trotting at her heels. "Ready?" "Ready," Pamela confirmed. Rhea had already shifted to wolf form, a massive silver creature that commanded respect. The other shifters were transforming as well, a coordinated display of power that made Pamela's breath catch. Dozens of wolves, all different sizes and colors, all looking to Cade with expectation. He transformed last, and Pamela watched with wonder as he became the massive black wolf she'd first seen. He was larger than any of the others, his presence undeniable. Alpha, Prince, King. He looked back at her, and she saw the question in his golden eyes. "Will you ride?" She'd never ridden a wolf before, but then again, she'd never done a lot of things before meeting Cade. "Yes," she said aloud, and climbed onto his back. His fur was thick and warm beneath her hands. When she was settled, he stood carefully, adjusting to her weight. Then he threw back his head and howled a sound that echoed through the mountains, announcing their departure, their defiance, their promise. The pack answered, and the sound was glorious and terrifying all at once. They moved through the forest like smoke, silent despite their numbers. Pamela clung to Cade's back, feeling the power of his muscles beneath her, the steady rhythm of his gait. Around them, the other shifters ran in formation, protecting their prince, their future king, and her. Ash ran beside them, his young legs pumping to keep pace. He looked up at Pamela occasionally, his tongue lolling in what might have been a grin. "You started this," she thought at him fondly. "If you hadn't fallen in that creek, none of this would have happened." As if he understood, Ash yipped happily. They traveled through the day, stopping only briefly for water. As they moved deeper into the northern territories, Pamela noticed changes. The trees grew taller, older. The air felt different, cleaner, wilder, charged with ancient magic. This was Cade's homeland. The place he'd been forced to flee as a child. The place he was returning to claim. By evening, they reached the foothills of the Shadow Peak Mountains, and there, carved into the mountainside itself, was a fortress. It had been abandoned for years, that much was obvious from the weathered stone and overgrown courtyards. But the bones of it were still strong, still defiant. This was a place built to endure. "Shadow Peak," Rhea said, having transformed back to human. She stood beside Pamela, looking up at the ancient stronghold. "Your mother's seat of power, your birthright." Cade transformed as well, and Pamela slid from his back. He stood naked and unashamed, staring at the fortress with an expression she couldn't read. "I barely remember it," he said quietly. "I was so young when we left." "Then we'll build new memories," Pamela said, taking his hand. "Good ones." He looked down at her, and slowly, his expression softened. Together, she agreed. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the shifters began making camp. There was work to do. The fortress needed to be cleared, repaired, made defensible. Word needed to be sent to the scattered northern packs. Preparations needed to be made for the coming conflict. But for now, in this moment, Pamela stood beside Cade and looked at the future they would build. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. There would be battles and losses, fear and pain. But they would face it together, and that was worth everything. Cade's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. He pressed his forehead to hers in that gesture that had become their own private language. A promise, a claim, a bond that went deeper than words. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For saving Ash. For teaching me. For—" He paused, searching for words. "For choosing me. When you could have sent me away. You chose this. Chose us." Pamela reached up to cup his face. "Best choice I ever made. And as the stars began to appear overhead, as the sounds of the camp building around them faded into comfortable background noise, Pamela realized something. She'd spent 3 months running from being claimed, from being owned, from being forced into a bond she didn't want. But this standing here with Cade, his arm around her, his heartbeat steady against her side, this wasn't being claimed. This was choosing. And that made all the difference. Above them, the moon rose full and bright, and somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled. The sound was answered by dozens of others, a symphony of voices welcoming them home. Whatever came next, whatever battles they would face, whatever trials awaited them, they would endure. Together, always together. If Pamela's journey from fear to freedom touched your heart, don't let this story fade into silence. Hit that like button and subscribe so more people can find the hope she found. Comment below if you believe everyone deserves a love worth fighting for. Because viewers like you keep stories like this alive.